Hello and welcome to Roundtable. To receive COVID recovery money from the European Union, a country has to show that it will spend more than 1/3 of that on green investment. There have been promises, but there are now concerns that the EU may be turning a blind eye to those nations that aren't keeping their word. Only Finland and Germany appear on track to honour the deal at the moment, with Italy, Poland and Portugal not even reaching 20%. That's around half of what's required. So are both the EU and member countries trying to make it all look good rather than actually fighting climate change. It's very good to have you along. I'm David Foster. We're talking about pretty much $800 billion potentially being doled out. So how much scrutiny will there be? Or will the European Union, while saying all the right things, actually fail to enforce the rules, much to the dismay of environmental campaigners? Under the European Union's plans, the climate crisis is meant to be front and centre of COVID-19 recovery spending. Its Recovery and Resilience Facility will provide $798 billion in grants to member states, provided they dedicate at least 37% of spending to green investment. The aim is to ensure member states work towards a more sustainable and green future while rebuilding from the economic and social shock of the coronavirus pandemic. On paper, it looks as though Europe is heading in the right direction. In addition to the COVID-19 Recovery Fund, its Green Deal is aimed at creating the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. But not everyone is impressed. The co-leaders of the Greens in the European Parliament, Ska Keller and Philippe Lamberts, said environmentally friendly investments had been, as they put it, circumvented, ignored or simply not addressed, leading to greenwashing and in some cases to a potential breach of the 37% spending requirement for green investment. The Green Recovery Tracker found in its first assessment that only 24% of the green spending share is going to activities that fully support the green transition. Is the European Union recovery plan less green than it looks? And is there a risk of returning to a business as usual scenario? Well, first up on this roundtable, we head to Berlin. There we see Felix Heilmann, researcher at E3G. He's been working on the economic response to the COVID crisis in Europe and is part of the Green Recovery Tracker, taking a look at whether the money's being spent properly. Team, we go to Athens too. Olivier Vardakoulias joins us from there. He's the lead economist of the Worldwide Fund for Nature in Greece. And then to Bratislava, and we see Juraj Melichar, campaigner at Bankwatch. Felix, I'm going to come to you first of all, because in a moment we're going to look at the Green Recovery Tracker stats for a number of different countries. But I want to ask you this. I have been to countless recovery, war zone rebuilding conferences where people make promise after promise after promise after promise, and everybody comes out saying, this is fantastic, and it comes to very little. Are you worried that that might be the case here?
Well, I think it's a bit too early to tell that. I think we have a lot of momentum in Europe right now for recovery, for green recovery, but the implementation will be really key. So right now we're in the phase where the Commission is essentially giving green lights to those recovery plans. And now in the coming years, we'll have to see, is the money actually being spent? I think the plans contain a lot of good elements. Obviously, there's some aspects in which they could have been better. So the jury is still out on that.
Okay, so plenty of time to work it all out. Let's take a look at some of the figures first of all. Top two in this graph, and this is from your group, Green Recovery Tracker, Finland and Germany. Finland way out in front with 42%. Then somewhere in the middle, there's France, 23%, well short of the 37%, I have to say. And you come then down to Portugal, 17%, and Italy, 13%. Italy, it's been pointed out to me as a special case. Why is that?
Well, in the context of the European recovery, Italy is the single largest beneficiary of the European recovery funds, making it obviously a very interesting country. And we've seen one Italian government essentially being sort of exchanged for another because of debates about how the recovery funding is going to be spent. So we can see it's a political issue in Italy. We've looked at sort of funds in some countries like France beyond the recovery funds from the EU. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, but that certainly makes Italy a very interesting case.
Okay, Italy gets the most money from the European Union, but is spending the smallest proportion. Is that a reason to be worried?
Well, the analysis we've done was on a draft plan or a submitted plan. We now have seen some changes in the plan following the negotiations between the government and the Commission. But we certainly heard from our partners in Italy that there's a bigger sort of strategic potential for Italy in using that money that isn't really used by the funds or by the plan right now. So yes, we do see this in countries across Europe. The strategic really use of those funds in many ways could have been better or could still be better.
There's so much more I could ask you about this, but I'm going to hold my fire on this so that we can bring in the other contributors. Olivier, Worldwide Fund for Nature, you're in Greece. What do you make of what you've seen around the continent on this plan?
Listen, I think there are two ways we need to look at this. The first thing to say is that, if we step back and we compare the recovery spending under, in this recession compared to previous episodes, it's definitely the case that there was a quite significant effort done by the EU in order to earmark, a significant amount of funds for the climate transition on the one hand, and then apply what is called the do no significant harm principle to the entirety of plans. So this is a kind of, huge break compared to what we saw in previous crises, not least, after the crisis of 2008. So, if we take a step back, that's definitely, a positive evolution. The next question, however, is whether, this is enough to significantly accelerate the transition of the European economy to a truly sustainable model to hit our climate targets for 2030, our biodiversity targets, our circular economy targets, and so on. And there the response is probably, it's fine, but it's not good enough. And we definitely need to look at a range of, other instruments further than the recovery fund if we're truly gonna see a sustainable recovery after COVID and truly accelerate the shift to a sustainable economy.
Okay, so same question to you that I put to Felix, only slightly different words. Are we seeing just empty promises, hot air, if you'll excuse the expression, when it comes to climate change?
No, I think, as Felix said, a lot remains to be demonstrated in practice. However, there are quite significant safeguards. The fact that, member states didn't get, the cash in hand to spend it in whatever they want. They actually needed to devise plans to make sure that a significant proportion of these funds are targeted towards the climate transition and so on, means that, I'm sure that it will be a step in the right direction. The question is, how large is that step? And as Felix said before me, it varies a lot from country to country. In some countries, we're still seeing, for example, investments in things like fossil fuels, in fossil gas in particular. In other recovery plans, that's not the case. For instance, the Greek recovery plan doesn't seem to include at least any investment in fossil fuel related infrastructure. So, that varies a lot, and everything will be judged in the implementation, essentially, as was aforementioned.
Okay, Juraj, I will come to you in just a second, but I want to bring up some words from two environmentalists who seem to be just a little bit concerned. Here we have Patricia Heidegger, and she says there's a risk that member states will repeat the mistakes made after the 2008 financial crisis and focus on economic recovery only while neglecting social justice. And now we have Barbara Mariani. All that glitters is not green. The recovery plans we looked at feature some good measures, but a lot of greenwashing. So my question to you, Juraj, is are you concerned that this is simply window dressing?
I think there are several points to reconsider in the EU efforts for recovery and resilience. First of all, there is this 37% allocated for green, especially climate measures. But first of all, when we take a look on the EU recovery and resilience plan and the EU funds, they should really incentivize the measures to meet more ambitious 2030 climate and energy targets. we have only very few crucial years for climate protection. And unfortunately, the strategical documents like the National Energy and Climate Plans or the models for 2050 decarbonization, for the climate neutrality, are outdated in many member states. And this means that we are preparing financing and reforms based on these outdated strategies and models. And these reforms and financing are probably inappropriate and definitely not sufficient.
What about in your particular area of expertise, energy and transport? I know you're worried about the fact that the European Union appears to be backing still fossil fuel gas boilers. Why hasn't that been kicked into touch?
There are some concerns from member states about the air quality, and they would like to solve energy poverty with fossil gas boilers, which is very problematic because importing fossil gas is very bad for the local economy, and also it's also not the cheapest fuel.
Sure. But the European Union isn't saying you can't do this. It's still out there. So why hasn't it got rid of this?
As I said, the member states would like to subsidize also protecting the air pollution, but the do no significant harm principle, which is guiding the member states towards more environmental protection, is not sufficient enough. It doesn't exclude these fossil gas boilers because, for example, the latest UN global methane assessment says that we need to reduce the methane emissions by 45% by 2030.
Exactly. And therefore, even if member states would like to keep these types of energy, these types of boilers, then they perhaps should have the money withheld until they fall in line. Is that something you would agree with? Just don't give them the money until they say, right, that's it, they're out.
Yeah, definitely support the energy efficiency measures like the deep renovation, where you can save like 60% of the energy directly by supporting renovation of houses and replacement of windows and so on, which can actually help even in these hot days and also in the winter, so people don't have so high costs for cooling and heating.
I'm wondering if it needs to be tougher, Felix, and I'd like to bring up the graphic we had at the very beginning, the one with Finland at the top, Italy at the bottom, but concentrate on two particular countries, France and Portugal. France, 23%. When it should be 37%. Portugal, 17%, 20% below the target. Do you think it's at all practical for the European Union to withhold the money from countries such as this until they fall into line?
Well, I think in general, yes, but that should, of course, be based on the Commission's official assessment. So we do our own analysis, and I'm happy to speak a bit more about that in a moment. But obviously, the Commission is doing its own analysis, and it's fair for them to follow that. Obviously, it needs to be solid. On France in particular, we've looked at the domestic recovery package, not just the recovery plan that gets EU funding. We're actually going to put out an analysis on that one next week, which shows that one is actually above the 37%. So it is doing better. In Portugal, there's a large funding which we assessed as having a likely climate effect that could be positive, could be negative. And we understand that there have been sort of improvements in the plan relative to the one we analyzed to make sure that those spending, for example, in new built homes, really also benefit the green transition. So,
and is this general, because pressure? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is this because pressure has been put on them? Somebody has said, unless you change, you don't get the cash.
Well, not in so many words publicly, but we have seen comparing different. So the process with these recovery plans often was that member states prepared a draft that was then published, consulted, discussed with the Commission, then went back to the member states. It's been this iterative process, not always very transparent, I should say, but we know it's been iterative, and we've seen improvements from draft plans to sort of later plans. So yes, there must have been some sort of pressure.
Okay,
there.
So reluctantly, perhaps, who knows, they are slowly falling into line. And Olivier, while Felix was talking, you seem to want to say something or agree with one or two of his points.
No, I do agree with both people who are present here, definitely. One thing to note, though, is that, as Felix said, the Green Recovery Tracker, because I've been working with E3G on that, essentially follows its own methodology, right? And here the problem is one of definitions, because the way the European Commission earmarks 37% of the funds to climate spending is very, very different. It's a bit of an antiquated methodology, I should say, compared to more recent tools such as the EU taxonomy, which has been created. And what this means is that there are discrepancies in how do you define, investments and reforms that are targeted to the green transition. So that's something to bear in mind because, obviously it's very important, the actual share which is going somewhere, but we're talking about two different methodologies.
What about, I'm sorry, just something occurred to me. What about if you make a promise to spend it on what the EU defines as a green investment, and then once you get the money, you decide, as has been suggested, Viktor Orban might have done in Hungary, you siphon it off to your own pet projects. What means does the EU have of clawing back the money or making sure that you become good on your promises? Yes,
that's an excellent question. There are, in fact, a few governance safeguards in place. And as far as I understand, at least, the way this works is that first you spend, then you demonstrate, what you've spent, and then you get the money. Except for a proportion of the funds which are allocated ex ante to respond, to the short-term needs of the crisis. So there are a series of governance mechanisms in place to control that. Now, if there are flagrant, for example, cases of breaching, the initial plan that was agreed and so on, that may become, a politically toxic issue and may be problematic. But on paper, at least, there is some possibility to essentially enforce those plans.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
The problem, though, which I'd like to flag, is the lack of transparency, particularly with civil society and so on. So the whole governance process right now, both at the EU level and at national levels, and the way these plans will be taken forward and implemented, is happening to a large degree with a lot of opacity in a number of member states. Not all, but in a number of member states.
Okay, so there are some rules, but it's very difficult to see sometimes, I'm guessing, whether the rules are being either adhered to or perhaps bent. Juraj, I want to ask you something. We're talking about only a little bit under a trillion euros here. It is a vast sum of money, and yet you say the European Union could have been more ambitious.
The challenges which are ahead of us, for example, the decarbonization, meeting the climate and energy goals, require substantive support. And I also agree with what Olivier said, that basically the member states needs to include also civil society, academics, regional stakeholders, progressive industries to actually set up all the financing in a way that will be able to actually come down to the regions and really incentivize good measures, like, for example, incentivize public transport instead of highway infrastructure, incentivize cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, which is really leading us towards carbon neutrality, not only like electric vehicles or hydrogen car infrastructure. So I think it's very crucial that the member states understand that together and in line with the partnership principle, together with the social economic partners, they will improve the quality and actually the absorption of the spending, because if I know the mechanism correctly, the member states will receive the money only if they manage to spend all of it, and there are some strict rules that they won't get a lot of funding as a block if they don't manage to spend it properly. So there are some certain risks as well.
Felix, I saw you nodding. You can say what you like about what we've heard from Juraj in just a moment, but I want to hear now from a Swedish member of the European Parliament. This is Jutta Gutteland.
Today is a historic day. Today we will enshrine into law that EU, which started as a coal and steel union more than 70 years ago, will become the first carbon neutral continent by 2050 at the latest. With this law, EU maintain its leadership as the region with the most ambitious targets for climate.
The European Union is ahead of practically everybody else in the world when it comes to its targets and its ambitions. Is that something you would go along with?
Well, I think if we look at the major economies in the world, the European Union definitely is a trendsetter and has been a trendsetter for climate action. I think the target is now shifting. So essentially, we've now discussed climate targets for a really long time. We've agreed in Europe, in the US, and China on this goal of climate neutrality, obviously coming from the Paris Agreement. Now it really is about implementation. And I think on that, we don't know yet. We expect the Commission to release a very big batch of legislation on climate in just a few weeks' time. Member states have a lot to do domestically. If all these things go in the right direction, the European Union can still lead. But we also see, for example, the Biden administration, but also China, also really going into the green transition now. So I would say the race is on, and now it's no longer about where do we want to go, but it's really about who's going to be the first to go through the goal.
So how does the European Union, Olivier, stay ahead? I noticed that you said it is the only large economic bloc that is targeting, deliberately aiming at getting greener and greener.
Well, I don't know. It's definitely not the only economic bloc, but I think that a key question from now on is essentially how do we meet these targets? And meeting these targets will require a mobilization of investments and funds, which is absolutely unprecedented. Now, to deliver these very ambitious targets, because if we don't put the means along with the ends, we're not going to succeed. And essentially, in the end, it's about money. Now, to deliver those, we need to look at, recovery plans, of course, but that's only one dimension. We need to look at a whole array of other dimensions in order to incentivize and to catalyze the necessary investments to reach those targets. And, I can name a few. A crucial aspect is the EU strategy for sustainable finance and how ambitious that strategy will be, because we need to definitely shift private finance from harmful activities to sustainable activities. There is a very big discussion around EU fiscal rules and the reform of the Growth and Stability Pact, because obviously we need to enable member states to be able to spend enough money in order to catalyze the green transition and to mobilize enough public funds to meet those targets, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
This is a conversation that goes much beyond, if you want, the recovery plans, which is more of a short-term thing.
Felix, I'm going to come to you, and then I want to address greenwashing with you, Juraj. But my point with you, Felix, is that this is something that presents massive opportunities, doesn't it, for companies, young, ambitious people, and those already established, to actually take them deep into the 21st century, economically viable.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, we know that direction of travel is towards the green economy. So whoever is the first one to develop the competitive solutions for that economy is going to be the one who benefits most from the transition. So yes, I absolutely agree. That's the opportunity, perhaps, of the 21st century.
And the green economy is going to be a success in your opinion, or is it still very much too early to say?
Oh, no, I think it's definitely going to be a success. And it's not a thing that's different to our sort of overall economy, but it's going to be how our entire economy is going to look like. We've got those targets, those legally binding targets now. We've got major companies making that shift now, really getting underway. So I think by now it's an inevitable process, and it's bound to succeed. I mean, we've seen all the analysis coming out, especially in the recovery debate, from the International Energy Agency, the World Bank, all the big institutions saying that green spending creates the most jobs, creates the most best economic returns. So I think that debate is really over. Again, now it's about implementation. Now it's about actually doing it, and that's the biggest challenge.
Fingers crossed for my great-great-great-grandchildren, and hopefully there aren't too many crooks out there trying to make their own way through this money. Juraj, how do you prevent this becoming, as that environmentalist I quoted said, just simply greenwashing?
Well, we need to take a look on the core principles and what is the most important in every area. Like, for example, in energy, it's most important to decrease the energy consumption. So the energy efficiency first principle, then applying the polluter pays principle, not like the polluter receives principle as we sometimes see. And also, for example, in transport, we now see that people are using home office and teleconferences. So minimizing the transport, especially the air transport and other polluting modalities, are the ways to actually avoid it.
Very, very exciting, you think?
Yeah, like for example, if you take only an example of Slovakia, 5 million country, 1/5 of the spending which goes from the recovery and resilience plan actually is flowing away every year on the imports of fossil gas from other like third countries. So creating a new markets for importing hydrogen produced by other fossil fuels is also one of the greenwashing traps which we would like to avoid.
Yes, my only thing is, and unfortunately we don't have much time to go into it. By the way, thank you each and every one of you very much indeed. You talk about how commuting might change electric vehicles. What happens, I wondered the other day, if we're all stuck in a massive traffic jam with electric cars and our batteries go flat? That's a question for another day. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on this program, and wherever you happen to be watching Roundtable, we thank you very much indeed for your time, for your patience, and your interest. From me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, until next time, goodbye.